Yeah, our tree farm is Wild Thyme Farm, located in the middle of the Chehalis River Valley in a town called Oakville. It's about 150 acres in total, with a mixture of about 100 acres of native forest and also pastures and orchards and all sorts of other habitats. The three brothers came here back in 1987 just looking for land and didn't really have anything picked out ahead of time. And a friend who moved to this area had introduced us to their realtor in a place that we would have never considered living in. But we came across this farm. It was in foreclosure, and it was an incredible amount of property and infrastructure for next to nothing. So we jumped on it. It's in the watershed of Garrett Creek, which is a major tributary to the Chehalis River. We're right at the base of Garrett Creek. And so the water comes off the hillside behind us in various streams, and then it goes right into Garrett Creek, which is in front of us here. But we really go out of our way to enhance and protect our riparian zones, especially the river here, Garrett Creek, which has salmon running through it every year. So we have pretty much any kind of wildlife that you would get in this region. We have elk that come through as herds. The deer are here all the time. Black bears. We've even had cougar wandering across the meadow behind us here, and a lot of the birds. And then our riparian habitats are full of river otter, beaver, and all the critters that live in that water system there. So we have an extended family here, and they come up and visit a lot.
There's so many aspects of it. I love the New England hardwoods grove up deep in the forest up here that we planted as kind of where we're all from, and the unique trees of that area. That's a fantastic place. I love the upper meadow and the big evergreen groves up there as you come out on top and you can see Mount Rainier.
So the income from the farm has always been a challenge because it's not of a scale that is conducive to commercial timber production, but we still do quite a bit of commercial harvest, specifically with hardwoods and alder. That's 90% of what we produce here. We've expanded into value-added lumber production, producing lumber, slabs, and even into finished products. So that's an evolving income stream.
Of course, now it's an active tree farm, and it has had retreats over the years, but it's going to be raising its visibility as a major retreat center for weddings, eco-retreats, corporate meetings. So we've renovated all of the buildings here. They're all upscaled, and so we can have 20 people at a time here staying overnight, enjoying themselves for a whole weekend.
Yeah, I think it's all about community here, and that's always in an evolving state as well too, that we're meeting new people. We have our standard usual suspects, and we do a lot of great sharing together.
So our biggest challenge here by far has been weather, major storm weather events. In fact, it was December 26, 96. We had a devastating ice storm here which took out a good third of our forest, the alder trees. And that was the main inspiration for getting involved in forest management, because by having neglected the forest the first 8 years we were here, we allowed an unhealthy and a structurally weak situation to develop in the forest that the ice storm took advantage of.
The reason why I nominated John and his family as Tree Farmers of the Year is because of their sense of community, their dedication and understandings of the science and principles of forestry, all the way from the individual tree level to the stand level, his involvement in the community, his willingness to share his information to the community by inviting people up and being involved with several groups all the way from local level to government level, forestry, to all the way to the national level.
So our legacy plan is still under development. We're not sure whether we'll be able to hand it over to within the family, or whether an organization would be better suited to operating the farm.